This is the Sprint Slate 10, also known as the AGT100. It's actually made by a company called Quanta. You can see the model number here on the back. And when it comes to getting parts for this thing, I'm not really sure where to direct you. Hopefully by the time this gets done, I will have found a charge port, because this one is destroyed. I'm not sure if you can see it on the inside there or not, but it's pretty tore up. But as far as getting a display for this, I would have no idea where to start. I can't find any supplier anywhere at the moment that carries anything for this. So hopefully this charge port will be compatible with some other model. Now when you take this apart, you want to make sure that you have your SIM card and your micro SD removed. One good way of getting these out if they're stuck, because they're very difficult to get a hold of right here, is to use a pencil eraser. So if you move this out of the way and just kind of press down and slide this, it'll grip that card and help you get it out. So this has become my favorite tool for stuck SIM or SD cards inside devices. And it's typically the SIM card that is a pain, because it does not have any kind of ridge that you can kind of grab a hold of. Now, fortunately on this one, the disassembly is relatively easy. You can start anywhere in between this bezel and screen here, or the back panel I should say, and the mid frame, and just kind of slide around here. You don't have to go very far. You want to be very careful when you go around where the volume buttons and charge port and SIM card tray are. Of course, in this case, we're not too worried about the charge port. So once you start to pull this away, it should open up. You'll see that it just has some clips on the inside that are kind of holding it together. Pop that open and you have a very simple layout. Battery right here in the center. Of course, we have our charge port attached to this logic board over on this end. So we're going to start by disconnecting the battery, and then we will unplug everything that's attached to this logic board, remove the screws, pop it out, and see if we can't figure out what would be compatible with this port. There are a few different ways you can go about unplugging these, but I recommend that you be very careful. There's not really a way to grab onto the center of the plastic here, which was what we're trying to detach. And if you pull too hard on one side, it's easy to damage that connector. So you kind of want to be able to get underneath all this stuff here and very gently just kind of lift both sides at the same time until that comes up. This wasn't actually too bad on the Samsung Galaxy tabs. Those can be a liability if you aren't very careful. Now let's see if we can get a little closer here. I would strongly recommend you just leave this thing plugged in and take all the screws out of where the speaker is located at the lower left hand side of the board, because getting this thing unplugged, it's going to make it look like it's going to break. And I'm really honestly kind of surprised that this thing stayed together. But if you do choose to unplug it, this is how it goes back inside, and it's just a really goofy design. And I think that I know that definitely if I did this repair again, I would leave this thing plugged in and just take the speaker out along with the board and be safe, because I think there's a pretty high probability that once in a while this thing is not going to come apart without breaking. So let's do this. We'll create a little more space by disconnecting this cable first. Now this will have a small tab here on the inside that kind of flips up this direction, and you can use a tool there, but I usually opt for my fingernail. That's usually the easiest way to detach those. And then this cable is actually going to kind of pull straight back. So without poking a hole through the cable, we want to get behind the whole thing and just kind of pull it out this way so it's out of the way. So that may not have helped a whole lot. I was hoping that would create some more space here, but it does not really. So I'm going to go in here and just kind of twist on this, and it should be popping out any second. All right, this is already a little sketchy, because what I had to do was look at this under the microscope. It really felt like it didn't want to unplug, and you can see why. There are two tabs side by side right next to those gold contacts. Well, hopefully you can see. I'm going to put this under the microscope later. But if you look right there in the center on the side, there are two tabs, and they stick out and they kind of lock down inside of this connector. So while I thought the battery was going to be the dicey one, it was actually this one over here. You're gonna have to come in with something very slim, get underneath it, and just kind of work very carefully. It finally did disengage kind of out of one side and almost started to go crooked on me, so I had to go off to the other side and kind of push it out the other direction. It's a little hard to explain. When I put this back together, hopefully I can give you a better idea of how that works, but I will put it under the microscope so you can see what that looks like. Now we do have this one disconnected here. Before I disconnect the screws, I'm going to continue around. You'll see there's a lever here. So we want to lift this one up. Am I on the wrong side? This lever right here will open up. Nope. I think I'm on the right side. Okay, so that's going to lift up. And where'd my tweezers go? I've actually got my nylon tweezers now, and we're just going to very carefully pull back on this cable. That's going to be for the camera, and look, that comes out pretty easy. So I'll set that aside for the moment, and we'll continue around here. We're going to have an antenna wire here, so I'm going to come in right under the metal piece of that and not put pressure on anything next to it. I'll try to get this at an angle where you can see. So you just want to get underneath there and lift straight up without scraping across anything on the board, poking any holes, etc. We have another cable here, so in case you didn't get an idea of how these work, you just lift straight up, and that's going to release the cable. It does look like we have some tape kind of holding it down over here, so I might have to peel that back a hair. Boy, if I can get in here. All right, so we'll just peel that away, or pull it out, that is. And we have one over here. We're going to lift this one up also. Take your time. These things are very fragile, and when they break, that means we're going to be doing even more soldering, assuming we could even source the part, which I think is going to be questionable on this. It's more than likely going to be buy another of the same tablet that is being sold for parts and use that. All right, I'm going to grab this one with my fingernail right here, pop that up. Did you go up? Okay, so that's lifted up now. We'll get this one. This is a very, very thin cable, whatever this is. And I honestly do not know where these go because I have never torn this thing apart and cannot find a tutorial for it. So we'll have another antenna wire here. And my advice is always to work your way around the perimeter of any logic board. You'll usually find everything that's connected to it when you're unplugging cables. So we've gone all the way around here. It looks like we've got everything unplugged. It's always a little tricky when you're watching this through a camera. But from here, we should be able to take out these logic board screws. So I'm going to grab my Phillips driver. In fact, I'm going to grab my brand new Kingston ratcheting driver because this is the easiest way to get this kind of stuff done. And I'm using a 1.2 bit on this one. So we'll start with the silver screws up here in the corner. Make sure we get all these out. And then you can see we have two black ones down there at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and just not use this screwdriver the right way because I forgot we have a ratchet. Let's use it. Well, that one was not even, you know, if there's no tension on the screw, the ratchet isn't going to do a whole lot. See that? That's funny. It is not, and there's not enough tension on these screws to hold the ratchet in place. So that, I think, is a sign of an inexpensive tablet. Let's see, did we miss an antenna wire? Looks like we did. I'm glad you caught that. Actually, that is unplugged. Okay, so we're good there. And we have these two black screws down here at the bottom underneath, or holding in what looks like, oh, now I can actually use the ratchet. So these screws do have a bit of tension on them. And I assume that is what, let's see, let's back up a little bit so you can actually see how this thing works. I love this screwdriver, but oddly enough, I choose the tablet that doesn't really cooperate with it. In fact, once you get these screws backed off of here, they do not seem to have enough tension to ratchet. So look at that. We have a warranty sticker. How much you want to bet there is a screw beneath that? Because they love to do that kind of stuff. This is probably our one hidden screw right here. If you applied some heat, you could get this off in one piece, but we know that this tablet is most likely out of warranty by now. But there you go. There's our warranty sticker intact. I'm going to set that aside. And we have our final hidden screw that so many manufacturers like to trip you up with. It doesn't want to stick to the driver. All right, so you can stay right there. We'll set that aside with the rest of our screws. And from this point, we should be able to remove the logic board. And it looks like this is kind of tucked in over here under the side. So when we go to put that back together, more than likely we'll have to lift up this speaker, take out these screws, and set the speaker on top of that. So I want to make sure that nothing gets damaged inside of that connection underneath there. So I'm going to go throw this under the microscope and see what we are working with. All right, so here you can see our old charging port, and it is right next to a couple of very small components. So we want to be really careful about applying heat here. I'm going to go ahead and put some Captain tape over these to kind of shield them from the heat, but hopefully they won't be a problem. And for some reason my camera did this initially. So unfortunately on part of this repair I can't really show you exactly what happened. I did add some leaded solder to the existing solder on the port to make it easier to bring the temperature down, and in just a second you'll get a better shot. It's going to be a very short one of me removing the port, but I switched cameras later on so that when I do the installation you can actually see in full detail what happens. So with a little flux and some leaded solder added to the pads and the anchors, I was able to come in here from the top side with hot air and just kind of heat this up, and you can see again I've taped off those areas that I was concerned about getting hit with the heat, and just some steady even heat over both sides of the port, and it came off and kind of jumped over to where not where I wanted it to be, but luckily I was able to get that out of the way before the solder turned solid again. Unfortunately at this point a lot of the video is kind of corrupted, so again for the installation you'll be able to see a lot more of this in full detail, but what I did is just kind of cleaned up the pads by using some solder wick and flux, and then for these holes, these are always a little tricky, but usually if you add some leaded solder in here it will bring that melting point down so that when you go over it with the wick it will suck up everything that's left inside there, and you'll have a nice clean opening where there's no solder inside that blocks it. And occasionally on these you'll lift out the majority of the solder, but some of it will be stuck kind of towards the other side of the logic port. So you have a couple choices at that point. You can flood it with solder again and go in and try to pull it towards the heat. And in this case, of course, because we have access to both sides of the PCB, we can actually flip the board over and come at it from the other direction. So if you find that that works better, that's totally okay. But in many situations, you don't have that option. So you've got to have sufficient heat, flux, and solder that you can melt that will wick up into the pad and leave you with a nice clean opening. Otherwise, you're going to have some problems when you go to install the new port. So as you can see here, some of this stuff's being a little stubborn, and this will happen occasionally. So if I pull the wick away and I find that there's still some residual solder in there, I'll usually go at it from the other side or just repeat the process by adding a little more leaded solder in there. But if you keep at it, eventually with sufficient heat and flux, of course, you will be able to get all of that solder out. And the key here really is getting that metallic part around the sides of the holes to heat up to the point where it draws the solder up towards the wick. And then, of course, as soon as it hits the wick, it will should go directly into the wick because you've got the hottest point being the iron itself. Okay, so this area is all prepped and ready to go. The only problem, of course, is that I could not find an OEM replacement port. So I have a couple of candidates here, and the original, if you want to take a look at it, let me see if I can find it here. This is the original. You can see it's pretty mangled. Obviously that's not going to work anymore, so that's why I went ahead and pulled it off. Even if I couldn't fix this, it certainly wasn't going to do any good for the person who owned it. Now we've come up with a couple possibilities. One was an old BlackBerry Curve port that is close. It almost makes it. Let's see if we can get this turned over here. Trying to look through the scope at the same time. So the footings almost match up there. I think if I took the excess solder that was here off, we could get that to sit down properly. And it should line up straight. I think that might actually work. The only problem, of course, is that this is a used charge port. And, you know, if the customer gets it back like this, even if it's working, there's probably going to be some concerns about, you know, the longevity on this thing. So I found another one. Actually, someone sent me a link, and I will credit him if he cares about that. in the video description. This is actually from a Lenovo laptop or tablet of some sort, and it's a brand new port. I grabbed a couple of them just to make sure. Oh, you're killing me. Okay, let me flip this over. So I grabbed a couple in case I needed a spare, which is usually a good idea. And you can see that this one lines up also almost perfectly on the inner legs, but these outer ones are just too far out. And I think a very slight modification, just bending those in a hair, would probably get it straight. And the pins actually almost entirely cover those footings, which isn't bad, as long as we know that we have a good connection on there. And then one thing I want to point out on the right-hand side, you can see there's just still a tiny bit of solder on this one right here, and that's I assume that's a ground pad, because those tend to be difficult to clean. They take the heat away pretty fast and keep things from melting properly. So when you try to wick it, you'll often run into that problem. So I'm going to take this port, bend the legs that are closest to me inward just a hair with some needle nose pliers, and see if we can get this thing to line up. Well, those legs were surprisingly easy to bend. In fact, you don't even need needle nose pliers. That's what I used initially. And afterwards, I realized that if I had come back and just held onto the port and just kind of take something solid and push on the side, those things bend in super easy. So in any case, I think I got it. Go ahead and lay it down right on top. And you'll see that those are lining up what I would like to call close enough. Just a tiny bit of flux in here so that those pads will be easy to solder down. I just realized I'm going to have to flip this whole board around, so I'm going to go ahead and set this into position. So let's spin this around and hope that we have plenty of room here with this new board holder. Will these fit down inside here enough to get some solder on? That pad's going to be a pain, we already know that. So I'm just going to kind of tack these in for the moment. A couple of them. And then I'm going to get my other iron. I do like to get the solder to flow behind these, so we have a good connection. But of course, the anchors are going to be what really holds this in place. So as long as we are connected, it's not usually... If you have a good joint and the solder does flow underneath the pin, you shouldn't have to worry about it coming off later. I might add a bit more to that. And even though this isn't what it's designed for, this tip actually can be used to fill up the holes. Well, I guess I could turn it on first, right? Try to keep this centered. All right. Look, we are ready. And I just want to make sure we have sufficient... Boy, that thing takes a while to heat up. Get some more flux on there. Just this one pin. It's always going to be a headache. And the rest of those are probably fine where they're at. The main thing is now we need to fill up those holes. So since we have access to the other side, it's probably the easiest way to go about it. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over. Alright, so we'll get a bit of flux over here, and we will flood these anchors in here. Alright, get this stuff melting. Heat them up, and we need this to go down inside. Not just the surface. I probably could change tips. And we flip it over, we'll be able to see how far that went down inside. But with sufficient heat, solder should be drawn to the opposite side of the board. So let's see what that looks like. And you can see it started to flow through on pretty much every leg there. All right, so there is our port. To make sure nothing's touching anything there. And if we heat it from up here, we can probably flow this joint a little more. Actually, I think I'm going to go sideways on this one, kind of come this direction. A little more flux and a bit more solder. Of course, we'll clean this all up afterwards. But I think that'll do the trick. So I'll come back, get this all cleaned up, and we'll test it out. It should be about ready to roll, I suspect. Oh, one more thing. We can check, turn off the fan, and make sure that none of these are touching each other. I have a multimeter around here somewhere that I'll grab in a minute. Put this thing into continuity mode and watch out for these razor sharp needles here so you don't poke yourself. All right, nothing there, nothing there, nothing there, nothing there. So we are good, and I believe that goes to ground. Yeah, so that's why that thing's so hard to melt. All right, so I'm just going to clean this up with some alcohol. And we'll put it back inside and see what happens. After looking at this very closely under the scope, I did decide to go back with a different soldering iron tip and just kind of retouch the footings, because these are the areas where the stress is supposed to be absorbed by, kind of solidifies the port so that it doesn't get damaged. So we want to make sure that we do have a sufficient joint, not just where the data and charging connections are, but of course on these anchor points that really give the micro USB its physical support. All right, time to get this thing back together and see if it's going to work. So make sure you don't trap these cables. These, I can't even explain how thin these are. These are like paper thin cables, so I know those would not take much to damage, and of course we're gonna have to plug them into this thing. So let's see, let's start by getting some screws inside first. If you remember, these silver ones are gonna go into I just knocked my screws over. Let's try that again. That's damn sloppy. All right, let's get this thing back together and see if it works. Now, be careful with these cables. I can't even explain. They are, I want to say they're thinner than paper. They are ridiculously thin. They're almost like tissue paper. So be very careful with those. We're going to want to get underneath them for the moment till we get some screws in this thing just to kind of stabilize it. And of course, we'll probably want some tweezers because, as you saw, I just kind of buried this one. It's not a good tool for the job. Let's see, where are my tweezers? This is not a pair of tweezers. This is just a single tweezer. Come on, get out of here, would you? Oh, we got a piece of tape over it. That's probably why that's laying down flat. So make sure you maneuver underneath that cable, and hopefully the rest of them at the same time. Oh my gosh, this is the hard part of this tablet. All right, we'll get everything laid down here. And we have some silver screws that go into the holes that have the round, or it was the 3 top ones here, I believe. And for some reason, I thought there were 4. I'm actually seeing 3 at the moment, so I hope I don't come up short. That would be pretty sad. One here, one here. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 holes, and I have 5 screws. So let's see, there's one here, obviously, so let's go ahead and get this one installed. And always check the bottom of your speaker. Oh, you know, actually this is probably going to go, oh, that goes over there. Okay, so this one we can put in now. Just want to make sure I don't have a screw stuck to the magnet on my speaker, because that happens quite often. Okay, nothing on that side, so that's good, but you can see a lot of times your screws will end up there because they like to get stuck to the magnet. So if you come up missing one, that's a good place to check. Okay, you're killing me now. I am going to need tweezers just to get this thing without poking a hole through that speaker membrane. All right, let's get this in here. There's one. I'm going to say 2. And where did our camera go? So our camera is where my other screw was. It was actually stuck to the camera. So there is the silver screw I was looking for. So if your screw's not stuck to the speaker, maybe it's stuck to another component, such as the camera. I probably should test this before I put all these screws back in. That would be an idea. So let's get this thing plugged in. Gonna pop this open. I actually closed those gates intentionally earlier on just because it makes it safer to prevent snagging anything on it. Now, these are going to be fun. Oh, got lucky there. That actually slid right into the correct spot. And that one does too. So that was easier than I expected. So lucky on that one. Now we have this one over here. Let's make sure that little gate is opened. And I think this needs to kind of be lifted up so that we can slide it from the side here. These are always fun. I do like when they give you a little white line to kind of use as a guide. I think we're all the way in there. We will find out when we power it up, and I just wrinkled this tape. Didn't mean to do that. All right. Actually, let's peel it back and can probably get that to sit properly. And we could always replace this tape with some Captain or something if we wanted to. You know, actually that's going to be fine. That's not going to go anywhere. It's definitely stuck down. So we're cool there. I'm going to say the camera must go here. So let's go ahead and get this installed. Actually, yeah, let's go ahead and plug the camera in, and then I'm going to see if this thing's even going to charge before I bother connecting the antenna wires. Right, so our battery terminal, only one way that's going to go on, and that is going to push straight down just like that. And I'll just set this stuff aside. Don't worry about the antenna wires for the moment. I do need a charger. All right, and for the moment of truth, go ahead and flip it over and get this thing plugged in. And we have a light down here. I don't know if you can see that. It's actually red. All right, so we have a red flashing light. I hope that, I got a flashing logo up here too. Let's turn that off. I hope that means that it's charging. It's probably going to take a minute to find out, so I'm going to leave this like that. Actually, let's go ahead and plug these antenna wires in. I am not worried about connecting antenna wires with the battery installed. That should not be a problem. But if you're worried, you can always unplug it. These things, getting them lined, I might need a microscope magnifier just to get these things lined up. These are very small. I'm gonna get my reading glasses. And it would help if I plug it into the right spot, which I couldn't see because that's how blind I am becoming. All right, there's that one. And this one's going to be a little more awkward to get to. All right, so we have our antenna wires plugged in. And it looks like we are still charging. Although now we have solid red, and look at that. Android power, or powered by Android. So it looks like we are getting the battery to charge. I'll let this thing wake up, and you can see, even though it's inverted, we have our charging indicator there. So that we'll call a success. I'll let this charge and get it back together. The only thing really left here to do is put this on. So I'm going to stop the video for the moment. Well, it's been about 10-15 minutes, so this thing should be ready to do something. And I believe, let's see, where is the power button? The power button is going to be on the top, which is actually the bottom right now. So I'll flip this around, and if we hit this button right here, we should get something on the screen. All right, so I think we're good to go with this one. It does appear to be powering up. Appears to take a while to power up. All right, so that's turning on. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and turn it back off once it powers up, disconnect the battery, and we'll put the rest of the panels in. But it looks like we have a functioning tablet. So let's go ahead and kill this. And while that shuts down, go ahead and unplug the port. And where's my spudger? Let's see if we're powered down. Okay, that should be off. So again, I'm going to very carefully unplug this one side at a time, like so. And we have our panel that goes. Does anyone remember where the warranty sticker goes? Because it's been a week since I worked on this thing. I know it looks like a few minutes, but that is because I had to wait for a part to come in. And it doesn't matter, obviously. This is definitely out of warranty now that the port's been replaced. Oh, come on. I want to say it was on this hole furthest to the right, if I remember correctly. And if I'm wrong, I'm not really worried about it. That's where it's going to go. Right, so we've got all the screws back in. I should mention that you want to make sure that this antenna wire gets routed down into this little channel, this little area, so it's not pinched between the back panel and the logic board. We can plug this in, and just for the heck of it, I'm going to take our preserved warranty sticker, and there you go. There's your warranty. SIM card, where do you go? SIM card is going to be up here. What in the world? Is that micro? Is that like a... Oh, that's funny. You can put the SIM card in after the fact. Forgot about that. All right, so we can actually snap this thing together. Just kind of pop on here like so. And SIM is going to go here. Right. If the panel's pushed in all the way, the SIM card will go right here. And that is why I always recommend that you check the perimeter. All of this thing is feeling kind of goofy now. What just happened there? Might have to redo that panel because I think I pinched this little rubber deal if I had it open. All right, so you sit down here like that. Go around the perimeter. Make sure you don't have any gaps, of course, because that always looks bad. And then we can install SIM. And we are good to go on this one. Lots of fingerprints. If you found the video helpful, like it, share it, check out my channel for more tutorials and product reviews, and most of all, remember to hit the subscribe button. Feel free to leave your feedback in the comments section, and thanks for watching.